Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in, welcome in. We'll be getting started here momentarily. Just sit tight. All right, we got a special guest. I'm waiting for him to get in here, but tonight we have a special guest joining me for a conversation. He goes by the name of Phillip Ensler. He is the Alabama State Representative for District 74. If you are in District 74, that would mean that you live in Montgomery and you are either from north side of Montgomery, Chisholm neighborhood, all the way down south to Spring Valley neighborhood in South Montgomery. Pretty much everything in between those 2 points, most likely you are in his district. Okay, so I think he has about 45,000 constituents that he covers in his district, and as well as many other questions as well. So y'all just sit tight and wait for my guest to get here. What's going on, Adrian? I see you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jay, Isaiah. Will appreciate y'all. Just sit tight, and we will have a great conversation tonight. All right, he'll be on here just a minute. So basically, if you're not familiar with what I do over here, this is the Captain's Quarters show. All right, I'm the host, Milliner. What I do is I have guests on from time to time to questions, right? So I have people on here from political backgrounds. I have people on here that are maybe a CEO of a company. I have people who run a nonprofit or whatnot, do different volunteer activities, and just people who are just interested in what's going on in the world, right? Have conversations with people. You can agree with me, disagree with me, doesn't make a difference, right? But it's just about having that conversation and coming to some type of common ground if we can, right? And also informing the public about what's going on and why certain things are happening. And so that's what I pretty much do over here. As far as the live show, now I do recorded content. Recorded content is usually a hot topic, a news item, maybe political, something maybe faith based, just depends. And I do recorded videos, and I release those to from Left to Right USA on YouTube, and I also do music reactions. I have about 16 or 17 videos on YouTube where I'm reacting to different songs from different artists. So if any of that interests you, check it out from Left to Right USA on YouTube and also on Facebook, the Captain's Quarters Show, which I'm streaming live on right now. I'm on Facebook right now. I'm Facebook on my personal page right now. I mean, excuse me, from Left to Right USA on Facebook, the Captain's Quarters Show on Facebook, and on YouTube at From Left to Right USA. So there's my guy Jay. All right, my guest is here. My guest is here. I'm gonna bring him on and let's get started. How you doing, sir?
Good evening. I'm good. Thanks for having me on. And technology took a second. Safari didn't want to work, so I had to try Chrome. But
Gotcha.
grateful for technology like this. And no, thanks for having me on tonight.
I appreciate you for being here. Um, if you would, introduce yourself to those who do not know you and reintroduce yourself to those who do know you.
Sure. So my name is Phillip Ensler. Wear a few hats. One is I'm a state representative for District 74 in the Alabama legislature. I got in last November, so just started up my second term. By way of background, I went to law school and have done mostly policy work. But before that, I taught at what was Lee High School, now Percy Julian, for a couple years after college. And still do a lot of work with young people. So certainly in the political government realm now, but my heart is with young people, and that's certainly a big motivation for a lot of the work I do.
Awesome, awesome. Um, so are you from here in Montgomery?
No, I'm originally from New York. Grew up there, went to college in DC, and then moved here after college. And it became Sweet Home Alabama. I loved being here, loved the community, and you know, life has a way of you got to follow where your heart tells you to, you're supposed to be. And certainly this is home, and home now. So really grateful for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, so what first made you even be aware of Montgomery and like wanting to even come here? Because I'm sure did you just decide to move here, or was there something else that happened that made you like say, "Hey, Montgomery's where I need to be"?
Yeah, so I had a history teacher in high school who was, that teacher that I'll always remember. And we learned a lot about the civil rights movement in his class. And that opened my eyes up more to the world, and especially the history that was out there. So when I was in college, I came down and spent a few days here in Montgomery, went to Selma, went to Birmingham. This was before EJI, certainly before Ubers and all that. So I came down and just spent a few days on myself, by myself, getting around. I didn't have my driver's license at the time because having grown up in big cities, I took the subway or walked everywhere. Relied on some friendly people that gave me rides, and just felt really, really connected to the history here. And having learned about it in high school, was one thing, but to then be here and on a what I would describe on a deeper spiritual level, just felt really, as I said, connected to the community here, the history. Didn't necessarily think I'd be back here talking to you, all these years later as a state legislator. But just seeing Dexter Avenue Church, going to the parsonage, going to the Rosa Parks Museum, seeing where some of the legends, people that I read about and learned about lived. It became much more real, and I credit my high school history teacher with opening my eyes and mind up.
Okay. And so what I know you mentioned earlier that you did some policy work um early on. So is that kind of what kind of pushed you into the political realm of a career or
Yeah,
of a serving way?
so after law school, I worked at what's called Alabama Appleseed, and they do a lot of criminal justice related work, especially now with around prison conditions. And I we were doing really important work, but I at times the frustration that I felt was working for an advocacy group. I was having to go to elected officials all the time and say, well, hey, I think you should improve this policy, or I think you can do this, better for the community, or this is what, this is how this is impacting people. So I got a little more involved on the local level. I did run for the school board at that time, especially because of my passion working with students. Came a little bit short in that race, but then a role opened up where I was able to work for the city of Montgomery as policy advisor to the mayor. So got my foot in the door doing a little bit more on the policy front from within inside government. And then from there, I can certainly get into this, but the demographics of the districts of District 74 changed. And it looked like it was a good opportunity to run for that seat, and all the things that I've talked about, all those kind of values, put those into play in a political sense, and right, that it worked out. And I've have felt that, when if your values are there and you care about the community, sometimes it makes sense to do it in an advocacy role, doing policy work. Sometimes it means being in government, sometimes outside of government. For me, it's just been about where can I try to make a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about that for a little bit. You hit on the demographic change that happened with the districts. Um, is that was that kind of like the driving force that made you say, "Yeah, let me run right now. I think I have an opportunity here."
Yeah, and so the district was majority white, and pretty heavily Republican. The demographic shift that it was then majority black, and there was a sense that the district would lean Democratic. Certainly knowing my politics and my views, they were more aligned with a district that leans more Democratic. But most important to me was that, and I say this not to badmouth the person that was in there, but to just recognize that the community deserves someone that's gonna, and the community meaning white, black, Democrat, Republican, that's gonna consistently show up, that's gonna pass along information. One of the biggest issues that came up was permitless carry, so allowing to have guns without a permit. I was constantly hearing from law enforcement and from people in the district how they were concerned about that. So I would say it was the combination of, certainly, look, when you run for something, you looking at the numbers and looking at the makeup makes sense. But to me, the biggest thing was, is this somewhere where I can try to make a difference? And especially having been at the city before that, there were a lot of things where the state had a say, or the state told the city what they can and can't do. So that opened my eyes a lot also, and got me thinking, hey, if I'm in the role at the state legislature, I can maybe have some small impact on what happens in Montgomery.
Okay. Um, do you when we talk about demographics and it was a majority, white district before, so it leaned Republican. Do you think that is there a racial component to ideology as far as when it comes to voting politically?
Oh yeah, I mean the numbers show it, that overwhelmingly, within Alabama, that white people vote Republican and black vote Democratic. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that, but statistically, those are just the facts. And of course, there are some white people that vote Democrat. I, at the end of the day, I would hope that everyone looks at the candidates and looks at what do they stand for, and what are they, what are their views, what have they done in the community, what are they going to try to do. But yeah, I think often, not I think, I know just that it often does come down to, to race, and it has for a very long time, when it comes to party politics.
What is it about why so all right, why is it that when it comes to the white voters, they tend to be more evenly split between voting Democrat, being independent, and being Republican? Like usually it's not quite 50-50, but if you look nationwide, it's pretty much split. It's like 53-47, somewhere in there. But when you look at the black voters, they tend to vote at more like 85-90% plus to one side, which is mostly Democrat. What what's the like? Why wouldn't it be more split amongst all races and not just white voters?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on it. One thing that I would probably trace it back to historically, around the time of JFK, but then certainly, with President Johnson, with the Voting Rights Act, and with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and then the 1968 Fair Housing Act. I think that there were a lot of very strong civil rights stances and programs that Democrats overwhelmingly supported. And I think ever since then, there's been this strong allegiance, that the Democratic Party has been the one that has continued to really support civil rights, voting rights, things that speak to black voters and black voters that had historically been oppressed. Whether that should still be the case is certainly, up to individuals to decide. But I would think that's kind of the historical reason, just because of what the Democratic Party has done from a policy and legislative standpoint.
Mhm. Um, so if we look at historically, do you see back, let's say 1950s or even later, were they more so voting more evenly, or did they kind of lean Republican, lean Democrat as far as blacks go?
Yeah, and look, if I remember correctly, Jackie Robinson was supporting Nixon, who was Republican for president. I think that changed when it came down to JFK and Nixon, who took a stance on civil rights. But Dr. King's dad, from what I've read, he was a Republican. So back then it was the party, the alignments were different. You had, it wasn't what it necessarily was today, and of course, think about it, the history of it, that Lincoln was a Republican. So I think there was a period of time there, certainly, during, after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, where black voters and certainly black elected officials were Republican. But my, again, not being an expert, but I think in the 60s there, that was when the big shift happened, when Republicans really started to oppose more and more kind of voting and civil rights laws. Not initially, but over time became more and more uh, against it. And then it was increasingly Democrats that were for it. And I think that's where then you saw that really strong alignment of black voters in the Democratic Party.
Okay, because from 1865, when the Civil War ended, up until about 1965, somewhere in there, about 100 years, Jim Crow was in place, right? And Jim Crow was in place that was put in place by Democrats.
Right.
So for 100 years, so it's it's weird because there was this history of 100 years of Democrats were the oppressors, right? Um, they were, Civil War was, part of the Civil War was slavery. Okay. Um, although there were about 5 Union states that had slavery ongoing during the Civil War, right? So we know that they weren't fighting against slavery because they had states that were actively having slavery. But anyway, um, so you had this 100-year history, and blacks were voting Republican. They were leading many states, as far as like Alabama, Texas, had black Republicans in the Senate, in Congress. And then you see the shift, like you said, around the 60s. And it's what I noticed was the civil rights movement happened in the 60s, and we had individuals like Martin Luther King Jr. You had others who Medgar Evers. You had other people who were fighting against discrimination and that type of thing, segregation. And so when those individuals got, some of them got killed, different things, it kind of shifted the view of politically what blacks wanted in this country, and it just, to me, it looks like there was a shift away from the family unit, keeping our families together, and then it went to, we got to make sure we're looking at our leader as far as what do they want for us instead of what do we need from them. And that's kind of what I saw kind of change when I look back in the history. But it's always weird to me that if you look at any other demographic, they're way more split on who they vote for. But when it comes to blacks, it's a huge difference. It just is weird. Um, you mentioned something earlier. You were talking about the permitless carry that
Yeah.
went into effect January 1 of 23. So we've had, here in Montgomery, most people, if anybody's paying attention, we've had crime go just haywire. All right. It hasn't been good. All right. I mean, I grew up in Montgomery. I can say with a surety, we had about 30 homicides, give or take, a year up until 2019. You look back from 2018 back to 95 or whatever, you can about average it out be about 30, 35 homicides. We've had averaged over 60 in the last 4 years. Now, when it comes to the permitless carry, that just went into effect last year, January 1. So that means 2022, 21, 20, 19, there was no permitless carry.
Right.
Homicides were already rising. Violent crime was already rising, all of that. So what is the correlation between permitless carry and the crime? Is that really the conduit to the crime, or is it something else going on?
No, great question. I always say this. It is way bigger than any one or a million laws, and the laws themselves do have an impact. The We'd have to see some more research and a study that really looks at crimes and how many were committed um, you know, with a gun that was held by someone that didn't have a well now that most people don't have to have a permit. I mean, there were ways to look into that, but right, it was an issue way before that. I think it makes it even worse now, or the potential to be even worse. But no, I agree with the point you made earlier. I say this all the time. It starts at home. It starts with having those that foundation and having that good family system. It certainly starts with good moral values. So the laws themselves, I'm not naive. I know that it's not just what's on the legal books and what's not. There are all these other factors that play into it. I think during the pandemic, and we increasingly see evidence that's come out of this, of that people did feel more isolated. Certainly being at home more, not being at work as much, not being around people, maybe being at home and being in closer quarters with people, led to certain, more anger or more tension. So that's why, some experts think that we saw a spike in crime during that kind of 21, 22 period. But no, I think there are a range of factors, and we are. It is foolish to box it into one thing or the other. I think it has to be all of the above. We have to be able to say we have to have smart laws. We have to have laws that make sense. We have to have a society that has good moral values and that foundation. We have to have a family that has a strong family structure, a community and a society that has it. So I think it has to be everything. And it is. I always say this all the time. I wish I had a magic wand that I can wave and stop the violent acts. But knowing that it's really complex and there are a lot of reasons why it's happening. But we have to acknowledge it, and we have to at least do what we can, both on an individual level, and that in my situation as a lawmaker, do what I can to try to address it.
Okay. Now, what would you say the best way to address the crime and the lack of education, all of that? What would be if you could make one law, pass one law that you think would drastically change it for the better, what would that be?
Yeah, I really think that what's called conflict resolution or intervention, where we're teaching young people how to deal with their emotions, and we are working with them. Yes, we have to educate them on history and mathematics and certainly financial literacy and all these other things that are so important. But we should also be teaching them, look, if you have a conflict with someone, if you have an issue with a peer or with a parent, really focus on, well, this is how you should address it. Here are ways that you can deal with it in a nonviolent way. So I think having that in our schools, of course, that starts at home and starts with parents teaching that. But to the extent there are policies and programs, I think having that in our schools, starting at a young age, middle school is especially those crucial years where transitioning from kind of child to young adult, really focusing in on that intervention, to teach people, look, there are other ways to deal with things in a nonviolent way.
Um, why is it that oftentimes when it comes to making laws and dealing with crime or dealing with education or dealing with any of these inadequacies that we have in society, the I never see any politician, and it's not just you, but any because I've spoken to many, and they really never mention this. Why is it that the family's structure doesn't get addressed? Like we tend to look to like existential reasons why children are more prone to violence or whatnot. But when it comes, well, we admit the family, but we don't really do anything legislatively for the family to be strong. So we make sure that they're getting that proper raising.
No, it's a great point, and I think you hit the, as I say, the nail on the head. That legislatively, it's hard. How do you legislate having a strong family structure? And I
All
think
right.
that, and I
Good
think there are,
question.
and I was saying there are ways, especially through the tax code, there are ways to incentivize having, if it's a two-parent home, filing joint taxes. There are ways to do tax credits. So I do think there are ways that we can look even more into it. And there are ways to incentivize having a family structure. But I think it's harder than, say, certain other areas where you can propose a law.
Yeah, it would. I mean, to me, like you said, tax code. There are definitely areas where there's opportunity for it.
Sure.
I asked one individual, and he said that we can't make families get together, stay together, and I'm like, well, sir, the government had no problem coming in and separating families, like because of legislation. They made laws where the family, the female, could not have a man in the house and get a check, a roof over her head, food in her stomach, kids, same thing, right? The government had no issue doing that. So it's reasonable to say, why not put those same resources into making sure these families incentivize, like you said, incentivize and encourage them to get together, stay together, because having the father in the home and having the both parents, a dad and a mom, that is the most sure way of making sure these children, end up like end up in your position, right? You had a father and a mother that raised you, so here you are. And if you look at most other, of your colleagues, I would venture to say, well over 90% of them were raised by a mother and a father. And most successful people were. It just makes more sense to me to figure that out. I would love one politician to focus on that and really try to make a push and figure out some ways to do that. But
No, and let me say this. I think that's a great point, and I'm a big believer in that. It's not right. We can't, as I said, we can't focus on just one area. So for me, I do talk a lot about gun violence, but I know that there are lots of other ideas and policies out there. So, two things. One, if there are things you come across that you see in other states that are focused on trying to keep parents together, please let me know. It's, there are times where you or others may see a law in another state that's working well, but on my end, I can also research it more and look into, I can ask our legislative staff, say, hey, can you look into, are there ways with the tax code? Some of this is more on the federal level, but to the extent we can do things on the state level, I'm more than happy to look into it. And if there are things that, I think could be good policy, I don't think we should limit ourselves to just one area. And right, the challenges are so real. And, as someone that works with young people, and I know how much a lot of them are hurting and suffering from and traumatized by particularly gun violence, that we have to put everything on the table when it comes to being open to ideas and being open to solutions.
that's right. Um, what do you we talking about the family? Um, what do you think of? Are you a supporter of like same sex marriage and like kids being trans, that type of thing? Like, is there anything that you support?
Yeah, so look, I support equal rights for everyone, and I know that there are people that are against gay marriage or they don't support LGBTQ rights. If that's their individual choice, that's fine. I think that individuals, though, we shouldn't discriminate against them if that's how they feel or that's how they identify. Now, and ultimately that should be up to them and their families to do what's best for them. And those are the values that I was raised by, to look at everyone and love everyone in an equal way. So yes, I am supportive, of those rights. And again, I know I know people have very strongly held religious beliefs. where they maybe are against that or they think there are issues with it. And I certainly understand, at least that is, sincerely held beliefs that people have.
Okay. Do you have, is there like a certain age that you would say maybe not, for like a child, let's say a child wants to, a 3-year-old, let's say a 3-year-old wants to be a boy and he wants to be a girl. Do you see an issue with there, or like, is there a certain age?
So look, I think individual families need to, however they're going to raise their child is that's not my place to tell a family how to raise their child. But no, as far as if you're talking about healthcare and some of those
Yeah,
transitions,
like hormone treatment, like if
absolutely,
it's
no,
like
no,
a
no, I don't. No,
12-year-old.
no, not at a young age. I think that's something where, and I defer to doctors and medical experts on them working with families to decide again what's the best healthcare choice for that individual. But no, I think at a young age like that, a child is from a developmental standpoint, very much at that in a developmental standpoint. And look, when it comes to that, it's not something that I necessarily fully understand, if that makes sense. And there are times where I have to better educate myself and understand it. But again, my bottom line is, making just sure that the laws don't discriminate against people, or that there's not room to discriminate against people because of who they are, in this world. Life is already hard enough.
What is your background as far as your faith? I know it's Jewish, but I don't know specifics. So if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up Jewish. For those who maybe don't know, I mean, that entailed going to what's the equivalent of Hebrew school, what we called Hebrew school. So kind of Bible school, Bible study, did that from an early age, had my bar mitzvah. So that's when you study Torah or study, Bible and the verses that I had, and we learned the Hebrew and then recited in Hebrew, were the Exodus from Egypt. Particularly, I had the 10 plagues. That was my what they call Torah portion, and then continued to as I got older. I think at a young age you maybe go to church or go to synagogue because that's what your parents do. But as I got older, I felt more connected to the religion and felt more connected on a spiritual level. Now my day to day, the first thing I do when I wake up is pray. The last thing I do before bed is pray. And, I really am a believer that we are all instruments of God, and we're all here to try to make the world a better place. And that certainly guides me on a day-to-day basis.
Is it and when you say you're Jewish, so there's different like versions to for a better for lack of a better word, but like different versions, different types. So would you be like Orthodox, or what
No,
would you
so
fall
I'm
under?
probably more considered conservative Judaism, and right there, there's Reform, which is kind of the least religious aspect. Reform Jews, especially Reform Jewish services, tend to have a lot more English in them. Conservative Judaism is a mix where we tend to have more Hebrew. We tend to learn the prayers and have our services with more Hebrew in them. And then Orthodox, though, much more religious, where they observe the Sabbath. That's when people, Orthodox Jews won't use technology on the Sabbath. They keep kosher, so all the rules in the Bible about not eating shellfish, not getting tattoos. So I'm kind of in the middle there when it's called conservative Judaism.
Okay, okay. Um, so if you so when you read you read the Bible, like the like Holy Bible. It's not a separate book.
No, it sounds right. So we read. So in Judaism, we read the Old Testament, and then all of the Psalms, the Proverbs, the prophets. All of that is then included. And I wonder, yeah, they're all. Oh, yeah. Well, I have one Bible here, but then yeah, the rest I have all sorts of versions on my bookshelf. But we tend to learn it. Not tend to. We'll learn the Hebrew part and then learn the translation of what it means. But yeah, the Old Testament of the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, is what we study.
Okay, okay. It's interesting to me about learning about Jew religion and that type of thing, because I know a little. I've done some research, but I don't know. Like, I know there's different kinds. Just like Christianity, you got Baptist, Pentecostal, Methodist, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but it's always interesting to hear from somebody who is in that religion. So when you got when you're in your position, right? You're state representative for District 74. How much does your faith guide you in your you serving the community in that capacity?
Yeah, like I said, and the values, that I've learned from Judaism of on a deeper level, some of the concepts we have. One is called tikkun olam, and the Hebrew that translates essentially to repairing the world or improving the world. That's at the core of a lot of what I do, and think that there's a saying in the Jewish faith, I'll paraphrase it, but that you're not obligated to finish the work, but nor are you free to ignore it. Meaning that as individuals, we can't solve every problem. We as individuals can't address every single situation or every ill that there is in the world, but we also doesn't mean we can ignore it. We have to try to do something. So that's drives me on a day-to-day basis. But then as far as my views on whether it's gun violence, whether it's on public education, on healthcare, those I look at. Well, what's best for people? What are going to help people in the best way? So I have my faith that certainly drives my overall public service, but I don't impose my necessarily religious beliefs on other people, because
Okay,
I know some people, people that we have lots of Christian people, we have Muslim, we have all sorts of different faiths.
right. All right. That's interesting because I mean, you would think that you would want to whatever your faith is, like that would guide you in all your decisions about how you govern or how you what kind of laws you push through and policy making, that type of thing. You would think that the faith would be paramount, right? It would be like the number one driving force in your decision making. But you're saying it's it's there, but it's more about what the people, I guess they kind of more guide the decision making.
Yeah, well, my faith is at the core of everything I do and how I live my life. I'll give a specific example. So, like for me as a Jewish person, we believe that Friday night to Saturday night is the Sabbath. I'm not going to legislate though and say, well, we need to, everybody needs to follow that or everyone needs to believe that. So that's my religious belief. But I know other people don't necessarily believe that. So that's the distinction. The commitment to doing good and to trying to serve others, which is a religious belief, that informs all my decisions. But then the specifics of how you practice religion, like I go to synagogue on Friday nights. I know most people go to church on Sunday. So I'm not going to try to force that or say, well, people need to, go to their place of worship on a certain night. So I live out my religious beliefs, but I also recognize that other people have other ways of living out theirs.
Okay, all right. What are I did see that you were actively um pushing for legislation for one was to kind of reduce this gun violence. I saw that, and I saw also you did a some kind of program at formerly Lee High School, now Percy Julian High School. Can you talk about those two things, or as far as the gun violence initiative, and also the the program at the high school?
Yeah, and like I said, the biggest issue I hear in the district, whether back to our earlier conversation, doesn't matter if it's Democrat, Republican, white, black, I hear people are concerned about gun violence, and I say this all the time. It starts at home. It starts with a good moral foundation, but there are certain laws and programs that we can pass that can at least reduce some of it. So one of the main ones that we announced this week was the conflict resolution program that will start right at Percy Julian. It'll also be in Goodwin and Capitol Heights Middle School. And then I think it's also going to be in Chisholm and South Lawn Elementary. And then the hope is to expand it every year. But in addition to your English teachers, guidance counselors, all that, there will be some specific, and I think it's important, particularly for our young men, that these be male figures, but have kind of coaches that work with them on dealing with conflict. And so that'll start in those schools. Again, my hope is that we expand it each year. That, and that's part of what I do with the legislature, is advocate for funding to say, well, look, we need these kinds of programs in our district and in the city as a whole. So even though we have a Republican majority, what I've figured out is, well, if I advocate for a good program, we can try to get that passed. So I'll keep doing that. One big one, though, are these trigger activators. Right now, and I'm sure a lot of people, are aware of them, that we have these small devices. People put them on the end of a handgun, and it turns it into essentially a automatic weapon or a machine gun. So it makes it much more dangerous. There's no state law banning those right now. So what I propose is that those would become illegal. And initially, well, let me say this, that some people will say, oh, well, if you make it illegal, people are going to still use them. Of course, right? We have a speed limit. People at times will still speed. We have stop signs. People will run a stop sign. It doesn't mean that you don't put a law on the books to at least have accountability should someone do the wrong thing. But also, if we have them on the books, the hope is that some people, at least in the first place, will say, well, let me not mess with those. Let me not get them because it's illegal and I don't want to, get caught with it. So again, I'm not foolish. I don't think like all of a sudden having a law banning them is going to magically mean that they all disappear. But if some people stop using them, that can make a difference. One other one or a couple others that I propose that deal with it, is having, there's something called a red flag law, where if someone threatens to, God forbid, shoot up a workplace, or they're threatening their significant other, the way someone can get a temporary restraining order, this essentially would temporarily restrain someone from accessing a firearm, but again, just for a temporary period of time. And there'd be due process. It doesn't violate their Second Amendment right in any way. But those have proven to work in other states at times where loved ones or law enforcement can intervene. And there are a few others, happy to talk about them. But look, like I said, every life lost, every life that is lost to gun violence is one too many. And I was elected to be a lawmaker, and I say this all the time, I have a duty then to propose laws that at least can collectively try to reduce gun violence, somewhat.
Yeah. So about when it comes to the gun switches. So great point about, you just click it onto the gun and now your gun goes from a semi-auto to an automatic. Um, that in itself is to me personally. All right, I'm a person who says that, the gun rights, shouldn't be infringed upon. Like, there's nothing wrong with an individual having a weapon that they want, right? Except unless you're a person who isn't supposed to have a weapon at all, like, a person that's a, felon, or maybe a person that's, 15 years old. You're too young to have one. Like, to me, that's more, it makes sense, right? Because let's be real, the people who are committing the vast number of crimes, gun violence or whatnot. Let's say Montgomery, for example, right? There are 70 homicides a year now. Out of those 70 homicides, how many of those individuals are law-abiding citizens, right? People who are, not getting arrested for crimes, who are going to work every day, who, going to school, making straight A's. Like, how many of those are those committing those crimes? Not very many, right? Not many at all. It's mostly individuals who are, have a criminal mindset. They're people who, raised in maybe a broken home where there's violence or whatnot. Those individuals are ones who, become felons. Then they still have a weapon, still committing crimes. Like, those are the individuals that are committing the crimes. So to me, when you're making a law, don't make a law that hinder the law-abiding citizen from protecting himself or herself. It needs to be, something needs to be done as far as maybe the judges give them a law where if an individual commits a gun crime, right? Let's say let's say you got a person that shoots into an unoccupied dwelling, right? Empty building, but they shoot into it, thinking somebody's in there. How about we mandate something where they do a mandatory 5 year, 7 year, sometimes some kind of sentence, mandatory. Then when they come out, give them a harsher sentence. Like you see what I'm saying? Where it seems like the same people are committing the same crimes over and over again. They get released, they get out on bond from attempted murder, and they go out and then they do murder someone. You know, it's it's like we're putting our attention into the wrong area where there's not really an issue. The issue is over here, right? It's the people who are committing the crime. Let's take care of them. The people who aren't committing crime, let's not infringe upon them because they need to protect themselves. And now I know that gets into a gray area because then it becomes, well, if I say, hey, I should be able to have a automatic weapon, you might say, well, what you need that for? And I'm like, well, because I mean, I want to, be able to shoot, multiple bullets, rapid fire. Like, I'm not going to do anything crazy with it, but I just think we need to put our focus into areas where it makes the most sense. I mean, do you see where I'm saying, or?
Yeah, no, and a few things. Right, there's absolutely a Second Amendment right, to bear arms, and we can't infringe on that in any way. With any constitutional right, though, there are reasonable measures in place, whether it's voting, whether it's free speech. We don't say it's an absolute right that you can just do whatever you want with it. We say, well, for voting, you have to register. For the First Amendment, you can't go shout fire in a crowded movie theater. There are all sorts of reasonable things we as a society say, yes, you have that right, but then in order to exercise it, you have to do it in a responsible way. So that's where I'm coming from, on it. And I agree, though. Look, there's some people when it comes to harsher sentences will say, well, look, even though people know that you can be sentenced to death for committing murder, that doesn't stop people from doing it. But there are other people that, of course, say, well, if you get too lax on it, right, people will think, well, there aren't consequences, so more may do it. And I think it's striking that balance of there has to be accountability, there have to be consequences. I do think what we can have more of, though, to at least for some people, try to steer them away from recidivism and from committing crimes again, is certainly as we've talked about, that family structure, but also having, for people that do serve time, reentry programs where they are learning, say, a trade or learning a skill. And we have some of that in our prison system right now. But even small things, people get out, they don't have an ID. If you don't have an ID, we all know how that goes. You're not supposed to drive. If you can't drive, you can't get to work. So, we need to do things that not to make it easier, but we need to I think, have those harsh consequences if you mess up, but also do things that are going to help people get back on a better track. Especially now with our prison conditions. I mean, a lot of people come out worse than they were going in because the conditions are so bad that it just messes with them so much psychologically. So we have to focus on, I think, trying to the extent we can, rehabilitate people so that way they're not choosing crime again. But right, to your point, though, if people are going to continue to do it, we can't just let them get away with it.
Right. Oh, there was a case. I don't know if you're familiar with this case. An individual, I think his name was like Ibrahim Hernandez or something like that. He uh I'll kind of be nice with it. He assaulted a female, okay, in a that kind of way. And so I think it happened like 2021 or something like that. So he got convicted, I think he got sentenced to like 3 years or something like that by Judge Griffin. And now he's gonna be out. All right, in no time, all right. Um, but you had this other guy, Charles Colbert, I think, or something like that. A few years ago, he assaulted a very young person, right? A child in that kind of way. And he got 4 life sentences. What can you do in your capacity to change these laws where these judges are not able to give a person who assaults either a child or an adult, whatever, in that type of way, right? What can you do about them getting this such a sentence so light? What's the purpose of even going to trial?
Right. No, and we certainly can have, right now there's something called sentencing guidelines that lay out for judges, depending on the crime, within, what the low end and the high end as far as what they can sentence someone's to. And those can always be, as lawmakers, I can't do it alone, but as a full legislature, we can pass a sentencing, change where it says, right, for certain crimes, it's harsher. And look, and I'll be honest on this. I know some Democrats, some give me a hard time at times when I say, right, we need to have stiffer penalties for certain crimes. And I say, look, I don't want to just incarcerate people, but right, we have to be sensible and smart about it. And if someone's doing something that's really dangerous, even as Democrats, we have to be mindful that, right, we're not being too lax on people. So no, as a full legislature, I mean, we can always adjust and have stricter sentencing guidelines for judges, as far as specific crimes.
Okay, so that's something. So, like, to your knowledge, there is a sentencing guidelines, and so you guys can alter that in one way or the other.
There is, and I'd have to double check on this. I think part of the legislature can do some of it. Then there's something called a sentencing commission that maybe sets some of them. I think the legislature gave some kind of authority to the commission to set some of those. But ultimately, I think as a legislature, we could, tell the commission how much leeway they have and don't. I'd have to double check on that. But there are ultimately, yes, if when it comes to incarceration, the legislature has a lot of say in what ultimately judges, can or cannot do.
Okay, fair enough. What do you believe about race and racism? Is it racism? Is that a real thing, or is that something that just kind of just gets thrown around to keep people at odds with each other?
Yeah, well, look, let me first preface this with, as a white male, I don't think it's for me to say if other people feel or experience racism. What I do know is that a lot of people say that they do, and I very much believe people that do experience racism. I do think that white privilege is a real thing, that there are double standards at times, or there are things that that white men are not judged or aren't viewed with as much of a suspicious eye. So look, our country has a history of racism. It was in a lot of ways founded on racism. Half of the country fought to perpetuate a racist system, and kept trying to fight for that. So I think it's still very much something that we're dealing with. I think we're in a much better place than we've ever been. But we certainly still have work to do.
But all right. So when it comes to the war, you said when you said half of the country, I'm assuming you mean the Civil War.
Right, exactly right. Meaning,
okay. So, but that's not quite right, because this is why there were about 5 states in the Union that they were allegedly, people that were against slavery, right? There were 5 states that actively had slavery going on during the Civil War. So wouldn't it make sense that if they were against it, they would tell those states, "Hey, no more, slavery. We're fighting against that." That doesn't seem to be the actual factor in the main factor in the situation.
right? And you're saying Union states that still has slavery.
Oh, say again.
So you're saying states that were in the Union that still had slavery, right? And I think that goes along with my point that are even more than half the country then was supportive of racism. And even look in New York, Chicago, DC. I mean, even in these places that were in the Northeast, they still had segregation policies. They still had things, that were discriminatory. So even if they were part of the Union, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they were angels and I think that the narrative that the South was only racist and the North wasn't is not true. And I think your point, exactly illustrates that the whole country, was racist in some ways, and then other parts were just even worse.
I think that people operate within whatever the law tells them to. Let me give you an example. So back in the 1950s, right? There was a such thing as a white only restroom, black only restroom, etc. Right? Blacks couldn't go into certain restaurants, whatever. All right. They were only allowed to. That was only allowed to happen because the law gave them the room to do that. Right. As soon as you see the law change and where there are no white only and black only and this and that or colored only, that stops, right? Because nowhere I've never in my life, I've been on earth for 36 years almost, next week, 36 years, and I've never seen a sign or been told I can't go there and do that because of the way I look. So it seems that people only do what the government allows them to do, right? So I think it's unfair to say that like half a country or a majority of a country wants to be racist or whatnot. They're only acting within what the law is saying at the time, right? So, which is why now you don't see people being told they can't go certain places, right? Like I know no one that is black or Hispanic or anything that said that they couldn't go into a business or go and do anything, go buy a certain item because of the way they look. It doesn't happen because the law is not there telling them that they can't do it.
Right. No, and that's why, I said that we're in a much better place than we've ever been. Because, right, we fortunately don't have Jim Crow laws. We don't have those kind of segregation laws on the books. I think there are still times that people or institutions can be racist or discriminatory, sometimes intentionally, sometimes subconsciously. And that's what we need to continue to work at. But no, to your point, it makes, and that's why I thank God for the civil rights movement and for getting rid of those laws. And I think continuing to chip away at, as they say, the vestiges, kind of the leftover effects of it, make a big difference.
Yeah. What's an example of something now, something that you see or that you have seen, during your time in New York or Alabama, whichever one, where you said, you know what, that's a great example of what I'm talking about as far as the racism aspect.
You mean of there being racism?
Yes.
I mean, I think a perfect example, I wouldn't say perfect example, but a classic example would be, if going into a store, if I walk in, the security guard isn't necessarily going to look at me and think, "Oh, I'm going to steal something." If a young black man walks in, especially a young black man, who's maybe not dressed in business attire, I've seen at times where there's been that suspicion, or the security guard kind of keeps a closer eye. So on that individual basis, in New York, I've seen this where on one side of this, you'll see a white person or a black person waving to try to get a taxi cab. The taxi cab won't stop, but a white person is waving, and they've stopped. And again, these are all anecdotal. This isn't necessarily system wide or happening all the time. But just seeing those at times and hearing those then from particularly black men that have experienced it, that's what has been the experience. But again, that's not a law in place. But some of those instances, where it can still happen.
What do you think that if you walked in to the store looking the same way, dressed the same way, having the same demeanor as that black guy that was, that he walked in and they noticed him. Do you think that you would get the same reaction if you were dressed the same way and acting, the demeanor the same way?
Honestly, probably not. I think that that's where race still at times. And this is, again, you can pick one store security guard. It can go one way or the other. But I think generally speaking, there's more benefit of the doubt given to, say, a white person, in that situation, or there may be a little bit more suspicion of of someone who's Black. But again, it depends on the situation, circumstances. But I never felt that as a white person that I was ever treated differently or viewed suspiciously because of my race, but certainly know, plenty of Black men and Black women that have felt that way or have experienced that.
Yeah, as I've gotten older and, once I really, started to learn about God and everything, I just realized there is no racism. There is no race. All of that is it's just smoke screen. It's a smoke screen to keep us at odds for what we look like, right? And I give you the example. So first off, in the Bible, it says that we wrestle not of flesh and blood, but against evil principalities at high places. So it's never been about the color of somebody, what somebody looks like. It's never been the reason why wars have happened. It's never the reason why people take the lives of other people or discriminate and that type of thing. It's always about power and control. Those who make laws to oppress people, they do it for power and control. They don't do it because the people look a certain way, right? Because if that was the case during, before the Civil War, you wouldn't have had black slave owners, you wouldn't have had black land owners, you wouldn't have had black doctors and teachers and professors. Like that wouldn't even have existed because racism, right? So I know that the color of our skin doesn't determine how we act either, right? So if you have a white person who is dressed, professionally, carries himself well, does that mean that he can't that um is he void of committing an evil act? No, right? Because he's a person just like anybody else. If a black person walks in and they look a little rough, not so well to do, does that mean that they're going to hurt someone or commit a crime? No, it doesn't, right? Because the color doesn't determine that. What determines how a person acts and their behavior is whatever spirit is in them, right? Whatever their spirit of good, which is God, or if they're controlled by a spirit of hate. And so it's never been about the color. We just see the color and then we determine, oh, well, that white guy did that to that black guy because he's white and he's black. Is that why he did it, or was it another scenario going on? And it just so happens that they look different, right? We tend to attach racism to different people for different things they do when it doesn't really belong. Like we try to fit it in when we don't really need to do that. I just, that's why I don't really like to vote for people based on color. That's one thing. Like I don't like to look at a color and say I'm gonna vote for that person because of that color. Like there again, you got Republicans that are black, Hispanic, white. You got Democrats that are white, Hispanic, black, Asian. So is it about the color or is it about what are they, like you mentioned earlier? It's about the person that's presenting to the people. Like they're gonna vote. They should vote for who is the best person for the job, not whatever their color is or what they look like. It's just it's just a fake thing. It's just a fake thing. We get sucked into. I used to be sucked into it too. Used to be sucked into it, believing everything was about race. Oh, they didn't hire me because of the way I look or whatever. I mean, it made no difference about my color. It was just how I presented myself. Maybe I didn't present myself well. That could have been it, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think that it is a great point that at the end of the day, those principles and thinking about how much our people, the people that we do elect to office and that are in positions of power, right? Do they have a good do they have those principles where they're doing it because they care about people, because they care about the community? Are they going to try to do the right thing? Are they going to be honest? I think that that's so important in politics. I even know I don't like the word politics because I think it should be about public service. And as kind of idealistic as that sounds, politics as a sense, well, right, people in politics are liars and cheaters and they're in it for themselves. But if you're doing it for public service, those principles matter. And I think that, right, that's a great point that in all of society, I was just right before I got on with you, I was talking to someone about, you know, how if we're just a little bit kinder to each other and a little bit, life is already hard, if we're just a little more loving towards each other, that can make a big difference. And I know that maybe sounds simple, but I think it has to, at the end of the day, right, we have to come from the heart and come from that good place.
Yeah, that's right. Treat your neighbor how you want to be treated. That's absolutely. Absolutely stand with that. Um, man, are you good? Do you need to go?
I do need to run. I'm actually I had to hop off at 7:30, but I was enjoying this so much.
Well, I
Um,
appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you for being on here.
Sure.
Um,
No, and let's keep the conversation going. And look, I know we may agree on a lot of things, disagree on some, but I think having the dialogue is so important. And I appreciate how much you're coming from a good place, and you certainly got me thinking, and that's really, how it should be, that we should have these kind of exchanges.
most definitely, most definitely. I hope that you'll come back.
Absolutely. No, would be honored to. And again, thanks for what you're doing. And thank you. I know how much you care about, what's going on in the city and especially with young people. So thanks for having the commitment that you have to making Montgomery better.
Appreciate it, and thank you as well.
Absolutely. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was State Representative Phillip Ensler. Great conversation. It went very well, very well. There were some things that we agreed on, some things we didn't agree on. But like you said, that is a part of when you're having a conversation or when you are coming from a different place, different background or whatnot, you're gonna have differences, right? And people have to understand that when you have differences with people, having the differences doesn't mean that you have to react in a, argumentative way or you have to be mean or rude or whatever about your stance, right? Um, I think we were able to talk to each other and hear each other's side and get a good understanding of where we stand, individually. Appreciate you, Jay. Thank you for watching, man, and commenting. Yeah, we ran over time, but I appreciate him for being on. We were on it for about a good hour, so that was good. That was good, man. Couple things I really would like to see happen. Two things in particular, and one of them I mentioned. Well, I mentioned both of them to him. One is they got to make some kind of laws where they give these judges uh strict guideline about the violent crime. Like when people commit crimes against children, against women, um, they you there is no way possible an individual should get 2 years, 3 years, you know, be on house arrest. Like that's not punishment. When if an individual hurts a child, right? Sexually or a woman in that way, like there's no way they should be free in a couple years. Um, Likewise, people who commit crime against a person who has the hate in their heart to go and commit a crime against someone and a violent crime, right? Beat them over the head with something, stab them, shoot them. However that plays out, there should be mandatory, mandatory minimum sentences Like not giving them 6 months, not giving them probation for a year. No, there has to be there has to be strict, 5-year sentences, 7-year sentences for the first offense. Make it whether it's the first offense, not their third, fourth one. We don't have time to wait for a third, fourth, fifth offense. Now we want to give them 50 years. Like we can't do that because they've already harmed how many people now, right? And like Phillip said, one homicide, one murder is too many, right? So let's not give the criminal 4 or 5 chances to harm 4 or 5 or more people before we want to do the right thing. Let's do the right thing from the beginning, and you know, it just needs to be some changes made, right? Also, about the whole family thing, like I would love to see one policymaker, one person in Congress and a state representative go and figure out something that can be done to keep families together. The only way that we're going to reduce the crime and have more high school graduates and just a more productive young generation of people. The only way is to make sure the family is together. So it can be done. It can be done. I'm not taking, well, can't do, well, it's hard to really do legislate this and do that. Like, no, it's easy to do it, make all these other laws. These other laws are put in place, no problem, easy. But when it comes to the family thing, now all of a sudden we got to figure out, and it's like it's somebody needs to step up. I just want to see somebody step up and say, "Yo, we're gonna do this, this, and this. This should make people want to be encouraged to have family because maybe they have, you know, they can save, $10,000 a year because they don't have to buy a driver license every 4 years, or they don't have to go pay for their tag renewal. They don't have to go pay property taxes. They don't have to go, like, you can things that you can do, and it'll just, man, it'll just incentivize it. It's no problem when they separate the family. Hey, woman, we'll give you free housing, give you food, take care of your children. We give you so much money per child, right? Had no problem doing that. No issue at all. So I think it can definitely flip around. We can do a 180 and go the other way, right? Most definitely. But overall, I think that was good. Very good conversation. And hopefully we'll do it again. And we can go further into some things. But man, what is happening? Oh, so if you're watching the video, if you're on YouTube, hit the like, subscribe to the channel. On the road to my first 1,000 subscribers, right? I think we're at like eight. I don't know, it's 820 something, 820 something. So on the road to the first 1,000. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're on the Captain's Quarters Show page, leave a like, hit that follow on that page. Um, Building that page up. I started that page toward the end of last year. So building that up, and that's where all my content goes. So when I make my content over, I distribute it to YouTube, and then I'm going to go and I distribute it over on the Captain's Quarter Show page as well, and then I also will share it to From Left to Right USA on Facebook. So, and that's a private group. The Facebook From Left to Right USA is a private group, so you have to join that one. And so, if you would do so, that'd be great. So I have different avenues for the content. So whatever, strikes your fancy, go that way. It makes no difference to me. I'm just appreciative that y'all, watching and are interested in what's being talked about and I'm hoping that it's informative. Um, and hopefully, it's something that you didn't know before, and maybe maybe make you look into something, or I know some people watch it and they like can't stand it, right? I mean, I know somebody's gonna watch this that can't stand the content, but they're watching anyway. So I appreciate you. Because you may go tell another friend that's got the mindset that you have, but then they come listen and they're like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense a little bit. So who knows? And another person just kind of changed their mindset a little bit. So hey, 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 it can happen like that, most definitely. But I'm about to wrap this thing up. Thank y'all for watching the Captain's Quarters show. Appreciate you. I was your host, L. Milliner, the captain. Appreciate y'all. Oh, my birthday is in what's today's date? The 8th. 11 days. 11 days, man. Whew, time going by so fast. I'm getting old. But anyway, thank y'all for watching. Appreciate y'all. Until next time, I am gone.